At a time of crisis, it is very important that we have think tanks that have got the prescience to focus beyond the immediate crisis and examine those issues that matter most to all our futures. And looking ahead to 2020, but also to beyond 2020, is vital if we are to prevent more crises. It's little wonder that in the United Kingdom, the Lisbon Council has got a reputation for big thinking on the big picture, looking at Europe in the context of global developments. It's nearly 2 years since the Lisbon Agenda formally expired, but I think that the name of this council remains very apposite. I was brought up as a schoolboy with history lessons about the tales of the great European voyages of exploration. So I associate Lisbon with exploration, with trade, and with courage. It was from Lisbon that Vasco da Gama departed on the first European voyage to India. It was from Lisbon that Afonso de Albuquerque began a journey that would discover what is now Indonesia, Thailand, and China. And of course, it was to Lisbon that Pedro Alvarez Cabral returned, having voyaged to Brazil. And this history of Lisbon is the European heritage. Europeans have always been intrepid peoples, not afraid of the world beyond our shores. And I believe that now is the time for us to recapture that spirit of exploration and boldness. It is a spirit that happens to be embodied by the work of the Lisbon Council, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to discuss in this context the growth agenda for Europe. For there's no doubt that our continent faces a major crisis. At present, it's dominating our government discussions, our front pages, and the worries of our citizens. It is, at one level, an existential crisis that threatens the second most held currency in the world, a currency in which Eurozone and non-Eurozone countries like my own are deeply invested. It is a crisis that is having a chilling effect on our economies. Right across the European Union, unemployment is rising, the costs of borrowing are rising, and government debts remain stubbornly high. This challenge is huge, and it must be addressed. But rumbling beneath the surface of this immediate crisis is a bigger and more important challenge to Europe. A fundamental shift in the global balance of economic power is now underway, from west to east and from north to south. It's not just about relative growth rates. With that news, we're depressingly familiar. It's about competitiveness. Other countries are making what we make, but often now not only cheaper, but better. Other countries are innovating ideas for things that we don't make, but could. Other countries are attracting the investment that we need in order to develop. And you don't just have to take my word for this. The Commission's excellent 2012 annual growth survey made the point that, I quote, long before the current crisis, overall EU performance has been weaker than key competitors. The productivity gap between the EU and its competitors is, the report noted, widening. This is the reality that faces us today. Now, it can sound threatening, but don't get me wrong, prosperity is not a zero-sum game. Yes, if we do not adapt, we may lose out, but if we do adapt, we can take advantage of the enormous opportunity that emerging markets present. The world is changing dramatically and speedily, and we must change with it, individually as companies, as countries, but collectively too as the European Union. The government of the United Kingdom wholeheartedly believes that our national interest is best served by being a willing and active member of the European Union. Europe cannot isolate itself from the changes happening in the world, nor can the United Kingdom isolate itself. We are members of the EU by choice and not by default. And my government, like all European governments at the moment, is asking itself the big question: how do we create growth? My Prime Minister, David Cameron, Mario Monti of Italy, Mariano Rajoy of Spain, Mark Rutte of the Netherlands, Donald Tusk of Poland, and 6 other leaders wrote last week to Herman Van Rompuy and José Manuel Barroso to give a joint answer to that question. And in so doing, David Cameron was demonstrating that Europe is central to Great Britain's answer. In a period of doom and gloom, it is easy for us to forget our strengths. Europe is still the world's largest single market. We have more people and a bigger economy than the United States of America. Our continent is brimming with well-educated people with a flair for innovation, and we benefit from being open to trade. Through our history and our geography, we have links around the world and a willingness to look beyond our borders. But we must not take these strengths for granted. Others can and already are developing them. We must therefore continue to build on what we already have. Let me start with the single market. This is Europe's greatest economic achievement. It provides European businesses with access to more than 500 million customers. Now just think, I want you for a moment just to pause, think yourself into the life of one of my own constituents back in Buckinghamshire in the town of Aylesbury. Now this morning, he will have got up, or she will have got up, he'll have brushed his teeth with a German-manufactured brown electric toothbrush, which had charged overnight on electricity provided by EDF, a French firm. He will have rinsed his mouth out with water provided by Thames Water, owned by the German company, RWE. He will have withdrawn money from his local branch of Santander, the Spanish bank with whom he has an account, before driving his Italian-manufactured Fiat 500 to catch the train to London, operated by Chiltern Railways, owned by Deutsche Bahn. Had he wished to fly here to attend this gathering today, he would of course have flown to Brussels from Heathrow, the world's busiest airport, in which Ferrovial, the Spanish company, holds the largest equity stake. Now, sadly, not everyone around Europe benefits in the way that my constituents do from the United Kingdom's openness to the rest of Europe. The single market isn't yet complete. Those measures which have been provided for in European legislation are still not always implemented equally in every member state. But since the single market was created, the world has changed and continues to do so. Our economies right across Europe have shifted towards services. Technology, too, has changed, and the single market must adapt to reflect this fact. It is unbelievable that EU citizens can use Spotify in only 9 member states. More than 40% of Europeans now buy some goods online, but fewer than 1 in 10 of us have bought something online from a trader in a different EU country from our own. The Commission's Digital Single Market Roadmap is an important and welcome step along the road to addressing this problem. And it's time for us to hurry much more quickly down that road. The services market, too, is still incomplete. There are restrictive practices that are hindering consumers and restricting growth in this vital sector, which makes up 4/5 of Europe's economy. Now, the answer to these challenges will sometimes lie in passing new laws, but often it will not. I'm delighted to share the platform with Enzo Moavero today. He and Prime Minister Mario Monti are leading the thinking in Europe and have some first-class ideas on how we should ensure the proper enforcement of existing regulations, and I hope that Enzo may say something on this later on. But this principle applies to financial services too. The United Kingdom wants to see a robust, dynamic and competitive financial services sector. A properly functioning financial services sector is vital to the economy. It helps people save for their retirement. It helps businesses to insure against risks and enables them to borrow in order to invest in capital equipment and in modernization measures. A well-run financial services industry is vital to creating jobs and growth throughout Europe. We in the UK are taking many steps domestically to bring in the necessary regulation. Importantly, we will implement the recommendations of the Vickers Commission to ring-fence retail banks from riskier activities. We will place higher capital requirements on our systemically important banks, and we have introduced a bank levy. We are not averse to radical ideas to properly regulate Europe's banks. And our approach to financial services is no different to our approach to the rest of the single market. We want to see a proper single market in financial services across Europe, created in a way which creates a level playing field for competition. And just as the financial services sector needs to be regulated, we also need regulation elsewhere. Good regulation is vital to a functioning economy. It is one of the fundamental roles of government. And a single market requires a single set of rules. But in this, as in every other aspect of life, it is possible to have too much of a good thing. Either too much regulation or the wrong kind of regulation heaps burdens upon business. For example, the average cost of starting a new business is higher in the European Union than in our major competitors. It costs nearly 4 times as much to set up a new business in the European Union as it does in the United States of America. And the EU needs to be smarter with its regulation. We need to think about the outcomes that we want to achieve. Where, for example, smaller firms pose less of a risk to fair competition or to the environment, it is right that they should have lighter regulations. And that's why I'm so pleased to see the Commission's actions to exempt micro-enterprises from regulations wherever we can. The UK thinks that it would be crazy to implement regulatory measures that harm growth and jobs. So we want all EU action to undergo a growth test. Measures that undermine growth should not be taken forward, they should go straight into the waste bin. Now let me turn to innovation. In the 18th century, Europeans invented and improved the telegraph, the steam engine, the electrical capacitor, and no end of machinery which drove the Industrial Revolution. Crucially, those technological innovators turned their ideas into commercial success. Europe is still capable of technological leadership. Both the web and the computer were invented here in Europe. But we are not making the most of turning our ideas into commercial success stories. The big internet firms, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, are American. They grow through their ready access to a single market. We should have that in Europe, but for digital goods, we don't yet have it. It's also much easier for American firms to access finance. 8 out of 10 EU citizens say it's hard to start a business due to a lack of finance. That's why we urgently need an EU venture capital regime that allows venture capital funds to operate on a truly European scale. And there are plenty of markets crying out for greater innovation. For example, the low-carbon economy requires new inventions, new ways of reducing our emissions. The global industry in low-carbon and environmental goods and services is already worth up to nearly 4 trillion euros a year. Investing in this ever-growing sector is good for innovation, good for growth, and can generate significant jobs and commercial opportunities in major emerging markets. And then we need also to focus upon trade. For hundreds of years, intrepid Europeans have travelled the globe looking for new trade opportunities, and not just those who set sail from Lisbon. Europe produced Marco Polo, Magellan, and Christopher Columbus. Foreign trade is part of our wiring. They did not look out from Europe to the rest of the world and see threats and dangers. They saw opportunities. And as the world changes around us today, we should do the same. We should not look at the rise of China, India, Brazil, and the rest as a threat to our way of life. It is our chance to increase our trade with those countries for our own benefit, as well as welcoming the growing prosperity of people in countries which have rested in poverty for too long. It can, I know, be tempting to follow protectionist policies in our trade relations. We must not be naive. We have to take the long-term view and think about where such protectionism leads. If we restrict access to our markets, then others will surely do the same. Europe, more than anywhere else in the world, has learned the hard lesson of how tit-for-tat protectionism quickly escalates. Indeed, preventing those beggar-thy-neighbour economic policies is one of the central purposes of the European Union, one of the reasons that lay behind its creation. We uphold this principle within Europe, and we should have the confidence to carry this principle into the world. So we should conclude free trade agreements with India, Canada, the countries of our eastern neighbourhood, and our ASEAN partners. We should also launch negotiations with Japan as soon as possible. All of the deals currently on the table could add 90 billion euros to the EU's wealth, and I believe we should be bold and ambitious in pursuing these important potential gains. So, Chairman, this is an extremely challenging time for Europe. The Eurozone crisis, yes, is dominating our attention. But if I may take a bit of a risk in predictions, I reckon that when the history of the 21st century is written, that crisis will not justify its own chapter. It will be referenced as a development that occurred at the same time as the Arab Spring. On the other hand, the fundamental changes that are occurring in the world economy will go down as a defining period in the start of the new millennium. Something akin on an historical scale to the Industrial Revolution or the collapse of communism. We must not be afraid of change. We should embrace it for the world, for Europe, for each of our countries. Economic development is a positive sum game. But in order to take advantage of it, we have to compete. We have to focus on growth, developing our strengths and addressing our weaknesses. The United Kingdom sees its membership of Europe as one of its essential strengths. And by developing European policy to cope with the realities of the 21st century, we believe that it can deliver for us and for our whole neighbourhood the sustained prosperity which our citizens seek and which they are entitled to expect. Thank you very much indeed.